Miami shimmered with humid heat, caught between sun and sudden showers. Sofia Ramirez clutched her world in both hands until her son Leo whispered, "Don't cry, Mom. I'll ask Santa Claus for my medicine." Across the counter, an heir to spreadsheets and profits listened and trembled. A child's simple sentence could pierce an empire. When dignity confronts power and contracts clash with conscience, what becomes of those accustomed to buying solutions? Discover how an innocent plea ignites a spark that transforms 3 lives and a city. Before embarking on this compelling story, subscribe to our channel and receive heartwarming tales daily. The air conditioning at the Cornerstone Pharmacy's Little Havana branch had ceased functioning the week prior, and no one seemed to care to repair it. Sofia Ramirez felt sweat trickle between her shoulder blades, clutching the medical prescription in one hand and her synthetic leather wallet in the other. December in Miami was like this, a humid heat that clung to the skin, a persistent reminder of all the arduous months of that year. In line, 3 people ahead of her conversed about the New Year's Eve celebration on South Beach. She mentally calculated the week's budget, while Leo, her 7-year-old son, leaned against her leg, exhausted from their recent visit to the community health clinic. The inhaler the doctor had prescribed cost more than Sofia Ramirez had anticipated, significantly more. Since Cornerstone Pharmacies had been acquired by a conglomerate promising modernization and efficiency, the automatic discounts for chronic medication had been eliminated. The new policy demanded registration in a program that was not yet fully operational. Alex, a young clerk in a blue uniform, avoided her gaze as he typed the medication code into the system. "Without the discount, ma'am, it comes to $240, he said, his voice almost a murmur. "I can split it into 3 card payments, but the interest." Sofia Ramirez took a deep breath. $240 was nearly half of what she would earn from her weekend cleaning jobs. The utility bills needed to be paid. The weekly groceries would barely last 4 days if she bought the medicine. She opened her mouth to negotiate, to ask if there was a cheaper generic, any alternative that wouldn't force her to choose between her son's breath and food on their table. That's when Leo tugged at the hem of her blouse. His eyes were moist, but he wasn't crying. He never cried. He was a child who had learned too early not to ask for what couldn't be given. "Don't cry, Mom," he whispered, his thin voice still trembling after his asthma attacks. "I'll ask Santa Claus for the medicine. I promise I'll ask nicely." The silence that followed was as heavy as the afternoon heat. Sofia felt something tighten in her chest, a pain that had nothing to do with lack of breath. Alex, the clerk, lowered his gaze to the counter. An elderly woman, Ms. Goldstein, in line behind them, murmured something about life's hardships. And then a man, standing 2 people back in the queue, moved with contained urgency. He wore a simple cotton shirt, faded jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days. Nothing about him called for attention. But there was something in the way he approached the counter, in the firmness with which he placed his credit card on the glass, that made Sofia turn her head. "You can add that to my purchases," the man said to the clerk, without looking directly at Sofia. His voice carried a distinct Miami cadence, though tinged by years spent away, "and my name isn't needed on the receipt." The clerk hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. There was something odd about the scene. Sofia felt her skin tingle with a mix of humiliation and confusion. "There's no need," she said, her voice firmer than she thought herself capable of in that moment. She straightened her shoulders. "I don't accept charity. I need work, not favors." The man finally looked at her. He was dark-haired, average height, with dark hair slightly disheveled by the heat. There was something familiar about him that Sophia couldn't place. Perhaps it was just the way he held her gaze, not with pity, but with something that seemed like genuine understanding. "It's not charity," he responded calmly. "It's responsibility." Ethan Sterling hadn't come to that pharmacy by chance. After a tense meeting with suppliers at the corporate headquarters of Cornerstone Pharmacies in downtown Miami, he had decided to visit a few branches unannounced. He wanted to see with his own eyes the impact of the changes he himself had approved months earlier. On paper, everything had seemed rational: cutting indiscriminate discounts, standardizing profit margins, stabilizing financial statements to attract new investors. The numbers made sense. The spreadsheets were impeccable. But here, in this little Havana branch with a broken air conditioner and worn tile floor, the numbers transformed into something else entirely. He had heard the boy's phrase with crystalline clarity: "I'll ask Santa Claus for my medicine." The words echoed in his head like an accusation. That innocent plea was a direct consequence of a decision he had signed without hesitation. Without thinking of the Sophias of the world, of the children who needed inhalers to breathe, of the families making impossible calculations at the end of the month. When she refused his payment with such fierce dignity, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Wasn't just guilt. It was recognition. Recognition that his attempt to help was, in truth, another form of exercising power. And she was not willing to accept crumbs from a stranger when what she needed was a system that worked. He paid for his own items and left the pharmacy without pressing the issue. The afternoon sun beat down intensely on the Miami Riverwalk, reflecting off Biscayne Bay with that golden shimmer he had always associated with Miami. But now the city seemed different, as if he were seeing it for the first time, without the tinted windows of a luxury car, without the comfortable distance of someone who could buy anything they needed. That night, in his Brickell Key penthouse, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stood on the balcony, listening to the sound of the ocean, thinking about the woman he had met at the pharmacy. There was something in her beyond the difficult situation. A contained strength, a beauty that had nothing to do with makeup or expensive clothes. It was the beauty of someone who fought every day and still found the dignity to refuse favors. The next morning, he did something he hadn't planned. He called Chloe Evans, director of the Sterling Foundation, the institution his mother, Eleanor, had established years ago to polish the family's market image. Every year, the foundation organized the holiday giving event in neighborhoods served by the pharmacy chain. It was a large event, with toy distribution, hygiene kits, musical performances. A pretty showcase of social responsibility. "Chloe, I need you to find someone to coordinate the event setup at the Overtown Cultural Hub," he said over the phone, his voice carefully neutral. "Someone with logistics experience who knows how to manage a tight budget. And they need to be trustworthy." "We already have a team, Ethan," Chloe replied, a little confused. "We always use the same contacts." "I want someone new, someone who truly needs the work." He didn't say the name. He didn't need to. He had obtained the contact through Ben Carter, the manager of that specific pharmacy, who remembered the loyalty program registration. A name and a cell phone number. Sophia Ramirez. When the foundation's call came, 2 days later, Sophia was in the middle of cleaning an apartment in Little Havana. The homeowner, a doctor who worked at a private hospital, always left her cell phone in the kitchen to avoid disturbance during work. The unknown number blinked persistently on the screen. "Hello? Miss Sophia Ramirez?" "Yes, that's me." The voice on the other end was professional, almost mechanical. A woman explained about the holiday project, about the need for someone to coordinate vendors, organize schedules, manage volunteers. The work would be on weekends and some evenings throughout December. Daily payment, Signed temporary contract, transportation back home included. Sophia listened in silence, the mop still in her hand, sweat trickling down her forehead. It wasn't much money, but it was extra money, and she needed it. Everything must be in the contract, she finally said. Payment on time, defined hours, guaranteed transport. I don't accept promises. Only signed paper. Everything in the contract, ma'am. The warehouse for the holiday giving event was in the Overtown Cultural Hub near the old Dorsey Memorial Library site. It was a spacious area, once a textile warehouse decades ago, now serving for city events and social organizations. When Sophia arrived on the first day, at 7 on a Saturday morning, the heat was already unbearable. The zinc roof turned the place into an oven. Chloe Evans, the foundation's director, greeted her with a professional smile, handing her a uniform, a white t-shirt with the Sterling Foundation logo printed on the back. There were other volunteers, mostly middle-class youth, doing social work to pad their resumes or ease their conscience. Sophia recognized the type. She wasn't angry with them. She just knew that their reality and hers were different planets. Your job is to coordinate the arrival of collected toys, organize the distribution lines on event day, and manage decoration suppliers, Chloe explained, flipping through a clipboard. Do you have experience with this? I have experience in keeping things running with few resources, Sophia replied, and I know how to negotiate. I learned that early on. She wasn't lying. Years of cleaning jobs and odd gigs had taught her to stretch a budget, get discounts from suppliers, to make much out of little. In the following days, she proved she knew what she was doing. She renegotiated a contract with a decorator who was overcharging, found a cheaper truck to transport the toys, organized a simple but efficient spreadsheet that showed exactly where every cent went. And it was during those days of arduous work that Sophia began to notice his presence. Ethan Sterling appeared at the warehouse frequently, always discreet, always observing from afar. She recognized him when she read his name on a donor list. Ethan Sterling, son of Eleanor Sterling, owner of the Cornerstone Pharmacies chain, the man who was dismantling the discount program that allowed mothers like her to buy medicine for their children. But there was something else, something that bothered her like a stone in her shoe. She knew that face, not from the pharmacy, from before, from long before. It was on a Thursday night when most of the volunteers had already left and she was finishing checking the stock of hygiene kits, that the memory rushed back. 7 years ago, she worked as a contracted cleaner at the Cornerstone Pharmacies distribution center in Doral, Florida. It was heavy work, long shifts, a salary that barely covered the rent. But she did it with dedication, without complaining, because she needed to. It was there she met a man who would occasionally visit the Doral distribution center. He was polite, unlike the other executives who barely acknowledged the cleaning staff. They talked, nothing out of the ordinary. Coffee in the cafeteria, conversations about Miami, about dreams. She liked him. She liked the way he looked at her, without the condescension she usually saw in men of a higher class. They went out twice, only twice, a stroll along South Beach, acai at a local spot, conversations about the future, about plans, about different paths that might, just might, converge. And then came the letter. A formal, cold letter on letterhead. A few lines explaining that the relationship could not continue, that circumstances did not permit it, that it was better for both to end things before they got hurt. The words were impersonal, almost legalistic. They hurt not for the ending itself, but for the detached language, as if she had never been more than an administrative issue to be resolved. Sophia discovered her pregnancy 2 weeks after receiving that letter. She cried. She considered seeking him out, but she decided against it. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't stoop to asking for help from someone who had discarded her so easily. She would raise her son alone. And she did. Leo was 7 now. He was the joy of her life, the reason for every cleaning job, every double shift, every strained bill at the end of the month. And now that man, Ethan Sterling, was here, watching her from a distance. Did he remember? Did he have any idea what his cold letter had caused? Sophia finished checking the kits and put away her clipboard. She wasn't going to confront him. Not here. Not in front of everyone. But she also wouldn't pretend he didn't exist. She had work to do, and she always finished what she started. He, on the other hand, didn't remember her. At least not clearly. 7 years ago, his life was a blur of meetings, travel, constant pressure from his mother to behave impeccably. Eleanor Sterling was a sharp businesswoman, a strategist who perfectly understood how the market operated. For her, the family's reputation was an asset that needed to be protected at all costs. Relationships with employees were seen as a potential scandal. Abuse of power, exploitation, headlines that could derail negotiations. Ethan tried to remember. Was there someone, a woman who worked at the Doral distribution center? Conversations in the cafeteria? He had a vague recollection of smiles, of an afternoon on South Beach, but everything seemed too distant, too blurred. And what about the letter? He didn't recall writing any letter. That's what compelled him to call Eleanor that night, a video call. She answered from her New York office, where she spent most of her time managing other family businesses. At 62, Eleanor was impeccable. Perfectly sculpted black hair, custom-tailored suits, an unwavering posture of self-worth. "Mother, I need to ask you something," Ethan began, choosing his words carefully. "Do you remember an employee named Sophia? She worked at the Doral distribution center about 7 years ago." The silence on the other end was telling. Eleanor said nothing for a few seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice held the controlled cadence of someone who had anticipated this conversation. "Why are you asking about this now?" "Because she's working at the foundation, and because I believe we knew each other years ago, and because I don't recall ever ending anything with her." "Ethan, that was resolved long ago. I see no reason to revisit old decisions." "What decisions, Mother?" Eleanor sighed. It was the kind of sigh that preceded an explanation she did not wish to give but knew she must. "At that time, we were negotiating the acquisition of the inland stores. Any scandal could have jeopardized the financing. You know how the market is. News of a relationship between an heir and an employee would have been interpreted as an abuse of power. I protected you. I protected the company." "You protected me by sending a letter in my name?" "I had a consultant draft something adequate. It was necessary." Ethan felt his stomach churn. "You forged my signature. I averted a problem that could have destroyed years of work." There was no remorse in her voice, only the conviction of one who believed she had done what was necessary. For Eleanor, ends justified means. They always had. This was how she had built an empire. Difficult decisions, with no room for sentimentality. "She has a son, Mother, a 7-year-old boy." The silence returned, heavier this time. "You don't know if the child is yours," Eleanor said at last, her voice still controlled. "And even if he were, it doesn't change the fact that at that time, the decision was necessary. Ethan, you need to understand that being in command means making choices that are not always comfortable." He ended the call without a farewell. He stood staring out his Brickell Key penthouse window at the lights of Miami, spreading as far as his gaze could reach. His mother had manipulated his life. She had fabricated a letter, ended a relationship that could have been real, all in the name of safeguarding figures on a spreadsheet. And now? Now Sophia was here, resolute and dignified, raising a son on her own, a son who might be his, and he had no conception of how to mend something that had been broken for so long. She was not cruel by nature, merely pragmatic. In business and in everything Eleanor considered an extension of business, including family, there was no room for sentimentality. 7 years ago, making that decision had been obvious. A relationship between Ethan and a contract employee could generate negative headlines. Exploitation, harassment, abuse of power. The possibilities were endless, all culminating in lawsuits or investor withdrawal. So yes, she had authorized an image consultant to draft that letter. Technical, clean, definitive. And now the woman was back. Not just back, but within the foundation structure, working at an event that bore the sterling surname emblazoned on every shirt. Eleanor did not believe in coincidences. And if Ethan began investigating the past, if he discovered that child truly was his, the consequences could be devastating. Not for alimony or financial responsibility. That would be easily managed. The problem was the narrative. The press would relish it. Heir abandoned son for years while profiting from community pharmacies. It would be an irreversible image crisis. 2 days later, Eleanor landed in Miami without notifying anyone. She stayed at a discreet hotel and asked her assistant, Marcus Bell, to arrange a meeting with Sophia. Not at the Overtown Cultural Hub, in a neutral cafe away from prying eyes. The Daily Grind in Little Havana at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Sophia arrived punctually. She was dressed with her usual simplicity, jeans, a cotton blouse, flat sandals. But there was something in her that Eleanor immediately noticed: dignity. The woman was not intimidated. She sat at the table with the posture of one who knew her worth, regardless of her bank balance. "Thank you for coming, Sophia," Eleanor began, her voice cordial but firm. She had mentally rehearsed that speech during the flight. "I want to discuss your situation." "My situation," Sophia repeated, not with sarcasm, but a genuine question. "I know working multiple jobs is draining. I know you're raising your son alone, and I've come to offer an opportunity." Eleanor slid an envelope across the table. Inside, a check and a contract. $50,000, she said, and a permanent position at one of our units in Orlando. A fair salary, full benefits, subsidized housing. Everything you need for a fresh start. Sophia looked at the envelope without touching it. In exchange for what? In exchange for you terminating your temporary contract with the foundation and accepting this transfer, and signing a document declaring you will not maintain contact with my family. The silence between them was thick. The cafe's hum continued around them. People ordered Cuban coffee, pastelitos, and cafecito. Normal life for everyone else, except for the two women at that table. "And if I refuse?" Sophia asked, her voice low but firm. Eleanor sighed. It wasn't a direct threat, merely a statement of fact. "The cleaning services contractor that employs you has a standing agreement with our network. Contracts like that can be reevaluated, terminated. It's a delicate situation." Sophia felt the ground shift beneath her. This was no empty threat. Eleanor wielded real power. Losing the cleaning contracts meant losing half her income. It meant inability to pay rent. It meant having to move out of Little Havana, pulling Leo from the school where he had finally made friends. It meant destroying the network of support she had so painstakingly built. But even as panic began to tighten its grip on her chest, even with her hands trembling beneath the table, Sophia refused to bow her head. "You are trying to buy me or threaten me. I'm offering you a better life. You are trying to keep me away from your son because you are ashamed of me." The blow landed squarely. Eleanor felt it, though she showed no outward sign. She adjusted the coffee cup in front of her, an automatic gesture of someone needing a second to recompose. It is not shame. It is protection. Of my son, of my company, of the reputation we have built. I do not want your reputation, Sophia said, standing up. She left the envelope untouched on the table, and I do not negotiate my dignity. You may revise any contracts you wish. You may try to destroy me, but I will not sign any paper stating I cannot speak with whomever I choose. She exited the daily grind without looking back, and only when she turned the corner, far from Eleanor's gaze, did she allow herself to truly tremble. It was only that night, when Leo finally slept after a milder-than-usual asthma attack, that she allowed her thoughts to surface. Sitting on the old sofa in the living room, with only the streetlight filtering through the window, Sophia considered her options. She could accept the money and the transfer. Start over in Orlando. It was a smaller city, but not necessarily worse. Leo would adapt. Children always adapt. And $50,000 was more money than she had seen in her entire life. But there was always a but. To accept meant agreeing she was less, that her place wasn't there. That people like Eleanor Sterling could decide where she should live, who she should speak to, which space was appropriate for her social class. It meant teaching Leo that dignity had a price. And Sophia didn't want her son to learn that lesson. The next morning, she called Lena. Their friendship went way back. Lena was the nurse chief at the community health clinic in Little Havana, a woman in her 40s with short-cropped gray hair, eyes weary from seeing much pain, and too few resources. They had met when Sophia first brought Leo to the clinic during a bronchitis attack. Lena had held her hand in the waiting room, promised the boy would be fine, and they had been true friends ever since. They met at South Point Park, one of the few public places where they could talk without interruption. The ocean wind blew strong, carrying the scent of salt and seaweed. Sophia told her everything: the pharmacy encounter with Ethan, the foundation work, Eleanor's offer, the veiled threat. Lena listened in silence, her face growing increasingly serious. "I have something that might help you," she finally said. "But you have to promise not to do anything rash." "What is it?" Lena rummaged in her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "A few years ago, I volunteered in the communications department of the Sterling Foundation. I helped with reports, accountability, that kind of thing. I was copied on some emails I shouldn't have seen. At the time, I found it strange, saved them just in case. Then, I forgot." "And what's in these emails?" "Exchanges between Eleanor Sterling and an image consultant, detailing strategies to terminate inconvenient relationships involving family employees. There's a draft of a letter that looks very much like the one you showed me years ago." Sophia felt her heart race. "You're saying the letter wasn't written by him?" "I'm saying there's proof that Eleanor ordered that letter drafted, and that it was sent in his name without his knowledge." They stood in silence, looking out at the ocean. The afternoon was clear, the sky cloudless blue, the water reflecting light like shattered glass. It was one of those beautiful days Miami offered generously, a reminder that not everything was harsh and difficult. "What do I do with this?" Sophia asked. "You keep it, and if you need to defend yourself, you use it." Sophia took the flash drive, feeling its weight in her hand. It wasn't just plastic and metal. It was power. It was the possibility of turning the tables, of showing that she wasn't defenseless, that she had weapons too. But using that information meant going to open war with one of Florida's wealthiest families. It meant putting Leo in the line of fire. "I need to think," she said, putting the flash drive into her bag. "I need to think very carefully." He began to investigate, not with private detectives or attorneys. He started with the company's own archives, financial reports from recent years, especially after the loyalty chronic meds discount program had been eliminated. The figures showed a short-term revenue increase, but they also revealed a decline in customer retention. Patients purchasing continuous medications were migrating to unregulated sources or simply discontinuing their treatments. The policy that appeared rational on paper was inflicting real harm. Ethan convened an emergency meeting with the board of directors via video conference. It was 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning. On the screen, serious faces of executives scattered across the nation: New York, Atlanta, Los Angeles. And he, from Miami, presented data that contradicted everything they had decided months prior. The elimination of discounts increased revenue in the short term, he began, displaying charts. But it significantly reduced our presence in long-term treatment markets. We lost market share in insulins, anticonvulsants, and respiratory medications. The very foundation of care for vulnerable communities depends on these essential medicines. And our network is precisely abandoning the public that needs us most. Robert Chen, the chief financial officer, a man in his 50s with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, raised his hand on the screen. Ethan, I understand the social concern, but we must consider our creditors. The financing line we are currently negotiating depends on solid statements. If we backtrack now, we will appear indecisive, unstable. Or we appear responsible, Ethan countered. I propose a segmented policy. Automatic discounts for chronic use medications linked to verified enrollment through a community health clinic. This way, we maintain control, ensure the benefit reaches those who genuinely need it, and stabilize long-term revenue. Silence. A few directors exchanged glances. Eleanor, participating in the meeting from New York, said nothing. She simply observed with that neutral expression Ethan had learned to fear since childhood. I want to approve this on an emergency basis, he stated, his voice firm. I have a demand elasticity study that supports the proposal, and I have a communication plan that transforms this into a significant reputational advantage. Let's vote, Robert said, still skeptical. The vote was tight, 5 in favor, 4 against. But it passed. Ethan disconnected the call, feeling a considerable weight lift from his shoulders. It was a start. It didn't resolve everything. It didn't erase the errors of the past. But it was a definitive step in the right direction. Before leaving the office, he called Sophia. Her number had been saved on his phone since Chloe had shared the foundation team's contacts. Hello? Her voice was cautious. Sophia, it's Ethan Sterling. I need to speak with you, personally. Not about work, about us. A pause, long enough for him to think she would hang up. I know about the letter, Ethan said, the words spilling out before he could think. I know I didn't write it, and I know you have a son. If he's mine, I want to do the right thing. But I need your permission. Permission for what? To take a test, to be certain. And then, if it's confirmed, to be in his life, in your life. Ethan was already there, seated at a table in the back. He wore simple attire, but Sophia now recognized the subtle signs that betrayed wealth. The discreet but expensive watch, the quality leather shoes, the impeccably styled haircut. He rose as they approached. Thank you for coming. They sat in an initial, uncomfortable silence. Diane placed a file folder on the table. Let's get straight to the point, she said, her voice firm but devoid of aggression. My client received an inappropriate offer from Eleanor Sterling, an attempt to distance her through payment and a veiled threat of professional retaliation. I have witnesses and a record of the conversation. If this continues, we will initiate legal action. Ethan did not seem surprised. It will not continue, he said, and I apologize for my mother's behavior. It was not authorized by me. Your mother acts on your behalf, Diane retorted. Acted. She no longer does. I made a point of making that clear. Sophia, who had remained silent, finally spoke. You truly do not remember me? Ethan looked at her, and the honesty in his eyes was painful. I recall vaguely conversations, an afternoon at the beach, but much of that time is a blur. My life was too controlled. I realize that now. I realize my mother made decisions for me, including decisions about relationships. She wrote the letter. I know. I saw the messages she exchanged with the consultant, and I have no way to apologize for something so appalling. But I want to make amends. You can't fix 7 years, Sofia Ramirez said, her voice trembling slightly. You can't go back and change the fact that I raised my son alone, that I spent sleepless nights because my wages weren't enough, that he suffered asthma attacks without me having money for his medicine. I know, and I'm not asking you to forget. I am asking for permission to be present from now on. If Leo is my son, I want to be a father, a real one, not just a name on a birth certificate and alimony in a bank account. I want to be in his life. Attorney Diane Miller intervened. If paternity is confirmed, we want a formal agreement for shared custody, established child support, health insurance, education, all documented, no favors, everything in contract. I agree to everything, Ethan said, without hesitation. Sofia Ramirez closed her eyes for a moment. This was it, the moment her life would definitively change direction. There was no turning back. If the test confirmed it, Leo would have a father. She would have to share decisions. Her life would no longer be solely hers. All right, she said, opening her eyes. We'll do the test, but with one condition, which is, you don't enter Leo's life until the results are out. I don't want him to build up hope and then be disappointed. And if the result is positive, we do this the right way, slowly, respecting his pace. Agreed. They left the exchange cafe with a folder of signed documents, dates set for material collection, lawyers' contacts exchanged. It was all very formal, very cold in appearance. But there was something different in the air. Something that felt like a suspension of judgment. A minimal chance that perhaps, just perhaps, it might be possible to build something from the rubble. Part 9. The paternity test took place at a Laboratorio de Análisis Clínicas in Midtown Miami, with attorney Diane Miller and Ethan's lawyer present. Leo didn't quite understand why he needed to do the test, but Sofia explained it simply. It was just to verify a family health matter. The boy accepted, distracted by the lollipop the nurse gave him after the blood sample. 15 days. That was the time frame the laboratory provided. 15 days that felt like 15 years to Sofia. She continued working at the Overtown Cultural Hub, organizing the final preparations for the holiday giving event. The event was on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Only 1 week remained. During those days of waiting, Ethan and Sofia developed a careful routine of coexisting. He appeared at the Overtown Cultural Hub to check on the progress of things, and they talked. Small conversations at first, about schedules, about suppliers, about the December heat. But little by little, their exchanges gained other layers. He asked about Leo, about what the boy was like, about what he liked, about his dreams. She responded with the care of someone protecting what she loves, but also with the honesty of someone who knows that secrets build nothing good. And Ethan spoke about himself, about how he grew up in a bubble of privilege, but also of loneliness, about how his mother, Eleanor, had directed his life as if it were an extension of the company, about how he had accepted it for so long because he didn't know there was another way to live. You know what scared me the most? He said one afternoon, as they helped unload boxes of toys. It was realizing I was replicating the same mistakes. Cutting the loyalty, chronic medication discount program seemed like a smart business decision, but it was just another way to treat people as numbers. And what changed? Sofia asked. I saw my son asking Santa Claus for medicine. She stopped stacking the boxes and looked at him, You don't know yet if he's your son." "I know," Ethan said, and there was absolute certainty in his voice. "The way you look at him when you speak, the way you fight for him. I know I am the father. The test will only confirm it." On December 19th, the result arrived. The Clinical Analysis Laboratory, Midtown Miami, sent it by email with a copy to the attorneys for both parties. Ethan was in his office when he opened the PDF. Sophia was at home, with Leo playing in the living room. They opened it at the same time, coordinating via cell phone. Genetic compatibility, 99.99%. Ethan closed his eyes and let the sensation sink in. He was a father. He had a son. A 7-year-old boy he didn't know, whom he had unknowingly abandoned, who had grown up without him because of a lie his mother had orchestrated. Sophia read the result 3 times. The words were clear, unequivocal. Leo had a father, and that father wanted to be present. It was what she had always wanted, wasn't it? For her son to have a complete family. But now, facing the confirmation, she felt fear. Fear of losing control. Fear that Ethan would use money to take Leo from her. Fear that her boy would prefer the comfortable life his father could offer instead of the simple life she provided. Her cell phone rang. It was Ethan. "Did you see the result?" he asked, his voice tense with contained emotion. "I did. Sophia, I want to do this the right way. I want to meet our son. Can I come to your home tomorrow? Can we tell him together?" Our son. The words felt strange, yet somehow comforting. "Tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon," she said. "Come alone. No lawyer, no driver, no security detail. If you're going to be his father, you need to know the world he lives in, not the other way around." "All right, see you tomorrow." He knocked on the door, and Sophia answered. She wore shorts and a t-shirt, her feet bare, hair pulled back in a ponytail. There was something different about her today. It wasn't exactly nervousness. It was the careful vigilance of a mother protecting her young. "Come in." The house was small but impeccably clean. Few pieces of furniture, all old but well-maintained. Photos adorned the walls. Sophia pregnant, Leo as a baby. Leo on his first day of school. An entire life documented in inexpensive picture frames. Leo sat on the sofa, watching cartoons on the small TV. When he saw the stranger enter, he became alert. That instinctive reaction of a child who learns caution early. "Leo, this is Ethan," Sophia said, sitting beside her son. "Remember I told you your father lived far away? Well, he's back, and he wants to meet you." The boy looked from Sophia to Ethan, slowly processing. At 7 years old, he had already asked about his father. He had already seen friends with their dads at the school gates. He had already felt the absence, though he never complained because he knew his mother grew sad when he asked. "Are you my real dad?" Leo asked, his voice thin but direct. Ethan knelt in front of the sofa, bringing himself to the boy's level. "I am, and I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. I didn't know you existed, but now that I do, I want to be close, if you'll let me." Leo looked at his mother, seeking confirmation. Sophia nodded, her eyes glistening. "Do you have money?" the boy asked, with the brutal sincerity of children. "I do." "Then can you buy my medicine?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. Ethan felt his eyes sting. There he was, kneeling on the floor of a humble home, before the son he hadn't known, hearing the only question that truly mattered to a 7-year-old child living with asthma. "Can you buy my medicine?" "I can," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I can buy all the medicine you need, forever." Leo thought for a moment, then extended his hand. Okay then, you can be my dad. They shook hands, father and son. And in that simple, awkward gesture, there was more honesty than in all the contracts signed in elegant offices. Ethan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He ended up doing both. Sophia watched them from the sofa, finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it could work. In the following weeks, they established a routine. Ethan visited 3 times a week. He took Leo for ice cream, to play ball on South Beach, to the movies. But he was also present during the difficult moments. When the boy had an asthma attack at 2 in the morning and needed to go to the community health clinic, Ethan went along. He stayed in the waiting room, holding Sophia's hand, waiting for his son's breathing to stabilize. And little by little, very slowly, Ethan and Sophia also reconnected. Not like before, not like 7 years ago, but as 2 adults sharing the most important responsibility in the world, raising a child. On the makeshift stage, Ethan made an announcement. He didn't read a prepared speech. He just spoke from the heart. All of us here know how hard it is to choose between food and medicine, between paying rent and buying what a child needs. I didn't know. I lived in a bubble, but I learned. And that's why, today, I announce the Affordable Meds Initiative. Automatic discounts on essential medications linked to your community health clinic registration. No bureaucracy, no exception, no deception. Because no child should have to ask Santa Claus for medicine. The applause was timid at first, then grew. Sophia was at the side of the stage, coordinating the distribution, and felt her eyes sting. It wasn't perfect. It didn't solve everything, but it was a start. After the event, there was a board meeting. It was by video conference, broadcast to all directors and board members. Eleanor participated from New York, her face as controlled as ever. But when the vote was called on her continued presence on the board, the result was clear. 5 votes for removal, 4 for retention. She lost. Eleanor, you've rendered great service to the company over the years, said Robert Chen, the chief financial officer who was conducting the meeting. But the practices recently uncovered are incompatible with the governance we intend to implement. You will have an honorary position, but without decision-making power. Eleanor didn't argue. She just nodded, turned off her camera, and left the meeting. It was the end of an era, and the beginning of another. Sofia Ramirez's temporary contract was converted to permanent. She was now the operations coordinator for the Sterling Foundation in Miami and the greater metropolitan area. The salary allowed her to comfortably pay bills, provided health insurance, and transportation assistance. It wasn't charity. It was a recognition of competence. She and Ethan Sterling did not announce their relationship, not because they were ashamed, but because they were building something slowly, brick by brick. They would sometimes have dinner together. They talked about Leo, about work, about plans for the future. And gradually, without fanfare, they realized there was something real there. Something built on honesty instead of illusion. Part 12. January arrived with heavy downpours that flooded Miami's streets. The city often ground to a halt when it rained like this. Water rising on the avenues, traffic impossible. A heavy sky that seemed like it would never clear. But inside Sophia's home, there was light. Leo was better. His asthma attacks had diminished with proper treatment, follow-ups with the private pulmonologist covered by their health plan, and medications she could now afford without choosing between them and groceries. The boy was stronger, more active, laughing more. Ethan had become a constant presence. He didn't live with them, not yet, but he spent weekends, helped with homework, took Leo to visit his paternal grandmother in Orlando once a month. Eleanor Sterling, for her part, was learning to be a grandmother. It wasn't natural for her, this affection without strategy, but she tried. She sent gifts. She called to speak with her grandson. She apologized to Sophia in a formal letter that arrived by mail, admitting her mistakes without justification. The relationship between Ethan and Sophia was complex. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were difficult conversations, discussions about Leo's upbringing, about money, about how to reconcile the very different lives they led. But there was also respect, care, and something that was beginning to feel like love. Not the explosive love from 7 years ago, when they were young and naive, but a mature love built on conscious choices. Lena Sharma, the nurse who had kept the emails for so long, returned to her usual routine, shifts at the community health clinic, attending to families, little recognition, and much work. But she had the quiet satisfaction of someone who made a difference when it mattered. She kept a copy of the emails in the Foundation's archives for future audit and moved forward. Ben Carter, the manager of the Cornerstone pharmacies where it all began, received training on the new policy. He and his team learned they could apply discounts without fear of retaliation, that justified exceptions would not be punished, that treating customers well wasn't romanticism, but smart, long-term strategy. Unit sales increased, loyalty improved, and Ben slept better, knowing he didn't have to choose between keeping his job and keeping his humanity. Miami remained Miami, a city of stark contrasts, of sun-drenched heat and sudden downpours, of poverty and opulence existing side by side. Yet in certain specific corners, things had undeniably shifted, not by a miracle, by deliberate choice, by the sheer courage of a woman who refused charity and demanded her rightful dignity, by a man who possessed the fortitude to confront his own profound missteps, by a boy who asked Santa Claus for his medicine and thus ignited a chain of events that transformed not merely one family, but an entire systemic framework. The Miami summer remained relentlessly hot. The ocean waves still crashed rhythmically upon South Beach. Cars blared impatiently in the city's characteristic chaotic traffic. Street vendors called out offerings of tropical snacks and beverages. Life, normal and bustling, continued to be as challenging as it had ever been. But for Sophia Ramirez, Ethan Sterling, and Leo, something profoundly fundamental had irrevocably shifted. They had a discernible future, not because it had been bestowed upon them as a gracious gift, but because they had fought fiercely for it, with signed documents, equitable contracts, and hard-won honesty. Justice, not a miracle. And in the final, unvarnished analysis, this was precisely what they required. Not a fantastical Santa Claus descending a chimney, but a system that demonstrably functioned, of individuals who honored their solemn commitments, of corporations that genuinely comprehended their profound responsibilities, of laws that were consistently upheld and respected, of people who steadfastly refused to accept anything less than their inherent worth. Sophia gazed out the apartment window, watching the rain cascade down. Leo was settled on the sofa, diligently working on his homework. Ethan would arrive shortly for dinner. It was a life of profound simplicity, yet it was irrevocably theirs, built meticulously, brick by painstaking brick, choice by deliberate choice, grounded not in fleeting illusion, but upon undeniably solid ground. And that, they had come to realize, was ultimately more than sufficient.